Imagine the sound first, not silence. Never silence, but a low, constant hum, like the breath of a living creature too vast to see. The Tudor palace was never truly at rest. Even in the black hours before dawn, the air trembled with motion, the shuffle of servants crossing stone floors, the drip of candle wax, the muted clatter of distant armor. Somewhere beyond those echoing halls, a king still dreamed, and hundreds of lives bent their rhythm to the pulse of that dream. Into this trembling world, you arrive 18 years old, cheeks still soft from youth, hands trembling as they clutch the letter sealed with the royal crest. You had thought the invitation was salvation, a chance to escape the dull countryside, to trade mud and prayer for velvet and power, to serve Queen Anne Boleyn herself, wife of Henry VIII, the woman who had defied a church and divided a kingdom. You told yourself this was destiny, not danger. You told yourself stories about silk gowns and laughter under chandeliers, about music drifting through golden corridors. You had no idea that the invitation was a trap wrapped in ribbon, that from the moment you stepped through the palace gates, your freedom would dissolve like candle smoke. The first lesson comes before dawn. You wake to the chill breath of a London morning. In a narrow bed you share with 5 other girls. The air smells of wool and ashes. You pull your feet from beneath the thin blanket, and the stone floor greets you like ice. There are no servants to help you dress. You are the servant now. Though no one will ever say the word aloud, you move quickly, quietly, as if the walls themselves have ears. They do. Everything in this palace listens. You dress in layers, each one a prison disguised as beauty. First, the linen shift, cold against your skin. Then the stays, pulled tight until your ribs ache. A reminder that breathing here is a privilege you must earn. The farthingale follows a cage of whalebone shaping your skirts into a perfect bell. You cannot run in it. You cannot bend in it. You cannot live naturally in it. But you look magnificent. And that, you're learning, is what matters most. By the time the bells toll 5, the palace is awake. You follow the others through corridors lined with tapestries, kings hunting, saints bleeding, angels watching with expressionless eyes. Each step feels rehearsed, part of a play whose script you've never been shown. Ahead waits the Queen's chamber, the center of gravity, around which your entire existence now spins. They call Anne radiant, brilliant, dangerous. And when you see her for the first time, if you understand why men burned churches for her, she sits before a mirror of polished silver, her hair unbound, dark as night water, her eyes sharp enough to slice through your thoughts. You kneel, heart pounding, hands trembling as you lift the bowl of rose-scented water. She doesn't speak right away. She watches, studies, weighs you. Every second feels like a test you might already have failed. Then she nods once, and the air in your lungs returns. Gentle hands, she says softly. You'll need them here. The rest of the morning passes in a blur of ritual and restraint. You learn to move like a shadow close enough to serve, invisible enough not to offend. You wash, brush, lace, and pin, each motion deliberater, silent, but precise. Every thread you touch is woven with meaning. Every jewel carries a secret debt. The Queen's gown alone could feed a village for a year, yet she wears it like armor. Her face, painted pale with lead, hides exhaustion behind perfection. You realize that even a queen is a prisoner, chained not by iron, but by expectation. Breakfast follows, a ceremony as dangerous as any battlefield. The Queen eats almost nothing, a bite of bread, a sip of ale. You pour carefully, Hands steady though, your heart beats like thunder. Around here, the ladies chatter about weather and music. Never politics. Never the king's name, unless spoken first by Anne. Their words sound harmless, yet every sentence hides a trap. Every glance a calculation. You begin to understand that in this palace, power is spoken softly, disguised as gossip, delivered with a smile. Later, in the Great Hall, you see the king himself, Henry VIII, the sun around which this glittering universe orbits. His laughter is too loud, his presence too heavy, like wine that's gone sour. He smiles at Anne, but you see the flicker of something colder in his eyes, impatience, maybe regret. And she, radiant under the torchlight, hides her fear with a smile that could rule empires. You feel it then. The tension beneath the beauty. The unspoken knowledge that every smile here is a weapon. Every dance step, a negotiation. Every breath a risk. By nightfall, you are exhausted but cannot sleep. The palace never stops murmuring. Somewhere a door creaks. A servant runs. A bell rings for reasons no one explains. You lie awake in your narrow bed, staring into the dark, replaying the day in your mind. You wonder if the Queen dreams, and if she does, whether those dreams are softer than her waking life, or filled with the same quiet dread that has begun to settle over you. You think of home, of the smell of rain on earth, of the simplicity of mornings where you could breathe without fear. It feels like a different lifetime now. You're part of something vast and glittering, a court where a curtsy can save you and a whisper can end you. And as you close your eyes, you realize the truth that every Tudor lady in waiting learns too late. The palace doesn't need to kill you to destroy you. It only needs to keep you awake, forever watching, forever perfect, forever afraid. The first bell tolls long before the sun dares to rise, and its echo moves through the stone corridors like the heartbeat of something ancient and watchful. You are already awake. The air in the chamber is sharp with winter cold, and frost patterns trace delicate webs across the window panes. Beside you, one of the younger girls murmurs in her sleep, whispering the name of a lover she will never see again. You stare at the dark ceiling and listen to the rustle of skirts in the hallway, to the distant scrape of buckets in the kitchens, to the faint murmur of prayers in the Queen's private chapel. Life in the palace begins in silence and ends in exhaustion. Yet somehow, it always begins again. You sit up, push the blanket aside, and touch your bare feet to the floor. It is a small act of courage to start another day here, to offer yourself again to a world that demands grace while stripping away your rest. The water in the basin has turned to ice along its rim. You dip your fingers in, and the shock wakes you better than any prayer could. Around you, the other ladies stir, their movements soft and practiced. The choreography of survival. There is no laughter in these mornings. Only the sound of linen, the sigh of laces being pulled tight, the whisper of a dozen small dreams dying quietly before dawn. You dress in silence, pulling the fine linen shift over your head, then the corset that compresses your ribs, until your breath becomes a measured act. The farthingale follows, heavy and cold, its hoops creaking faintly as they settle around your hips. When you move, the structure sways with the rhythm of your body, reminding you that even your own shape no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the court, to the image, to the illusion that must be maintained. For a few stolen minutes, you sit by the window and watch the horizon begin to pale. The river beyond the walls catches the first thread of light, and for an instant, you can imagine what peace might feel like. Then the second bell rings, and peace disappears. You rise, smooth the wrinkles from your gown, and join the line of women making their way through the corridors toward the Queen's chamber. The halls smell of smoke and perfume, an unsettling mixture of decay and sweetness. Servants move quietly aside as you pass, heads bowed, eyes lowered. You remember that none of them are supposed to look directly at you, just as you are not supposed to look too long at anyone else. In this world, seeing too much is dangerous. The Queen's chamber is already glowing with candlelight. When you enter, Anne sits near the fire, her dark hair braided and half undone, her expression distant as she stares into the flames. Her beauty is the kind that frightens people, a beauty that seems to know it will not last. You curtsy, low enough that your knees ache, and she nods in acknowledgement. The morning ritual begins. Rose water, warm cloths, soft hands. You move carefully, conscious that every gesture carries weight. To touch the Queen is to step across an invisible line between servitude and intimacy, and you must never forget which side of that line you belong to. She speaks little this morning, her voice low and weary. When she does, her words are clipped, her tone carrying that subtle edge that warns of danger beneath the calm. You sense it immediately. Something has unsettled her, though you dare not ask what. As you dress her, layer upon layer, you catch glimpses of the woman beneath the crown. Her skin is pale where the corset has left its marks, her shoulders narrow, her breathing shallow. You wonder how much of her strength is real and how much is performance. She catches your reflection in the polished silver mirror and says quietly, almost to herself, "A queen must never look tired." You nod because that is what is expected. But in your heart, you think that the cost of never looking tired is the slow death of the soul. The gown for today is crimson, heavy with gold embroidery, and as you fasten the final clasp, you feel the weight of it pressing down like a verdict. She looks magnificent, untouchable, almost divine, and yet you know the truth of the fragile body that wears it. The Queen's breakfast arrives on a silver tray, carried by two servants who look as though they fear to breathe. You arrange the dishes, pour the ale, and step back. Anne eats little, as always. A crumb of bread, a sip of ale, a glance toward the window. Her appetite has grown smaller with each passing week, and you can no longer tell whether it's the corset, the tension, or the creeping dread that consumes her. Around here, the other ladies speak of harmless things, the colour of the frost, the song of the chapel choir. But beneath their calm words is the unspoken question that everyone feels but no one dares to ask: is she with child again? The court waits for another son to secure her place. And each silence at breakfast grows heavier with the weight of what has not yet happened. After the meal, you follow her to the chapel. The air there is heavy with incense and expectation. You kneel 3 paces behind her, hands clasped, eyes lowered. But your thoughts wander. The prayers roll through the chamber like waves, Latin words you have repeated so often that they have lost their meaning. You focus instead on the rhythm of the Queen's breathing, the tremor in her hand as she crosses herself, the faint sheen of sweat at her temple. You wonder whether faith offers her any comfort or whether, like you, she prays only out of duty. When the priest mentions the king's name, her back stiffens ever so slightly, and you feel the whole court tense with her. It is in such small movements that the fate of kingdoms turns. When Mass ends, you accompany her through the corridors toward the great hall. Sunlight filters through stained glass, painting her gown in shards of crimson and gold. People step aside as she passes, their bows deep, their smiles careful. You walk behind her, 3 steps back, the perfect distance close enough to serve, far enough not to intrude. You have learned to watch without appearing to look. who greets her with warmth, who hesitates before bowing, who whispers after she has gone. Every detail matters. Every gesture is a clue. The court is a chessboard, and you are learning that survival depends on seeing moves before they're made. By midday, the hall hums with noise servants preparing for the dinner, messengers arriving with letters, courtiers gossiping under their breath. You are sent to fetch a new ribbon for the Queen's hood from the wardrobe room, and as you walk alone through the side corridor, you catch your reflection in a polished shield hanging on the wall. For a moment, you barely recognize the girl staring back. The painted face, the perfect posture, the eyes that no longer blink in surprise. She looks like one of the marble statues that guard the chapel doors. You wonder how long it takes before pretending becomes permanent, before the performance consumes the person beneath it. When you return, the Queen is speaking softly with Lady Margaret Wyatt. Their heads are bent close, their voices low. You sense the pulse of tension beneath the calm words. A letter lies half hidden beneath Anne's hand, the wax seal broken. You catch only a fragment of her voice. He cannot be trusted before she looks up and dismisses you with a slight tilt of her chin. You back away, curtsy, and withdraw without a word. But the phrase echoes in your mind long after. He cannot be trusted. Was it the King Cromwell or someone closer still? You will never know. Yet the sentence coils around your thoughts like smoke. Impossible to forget. By the time the sun begins to sink, the palace feels different. The air thicker, charged with invisible electricity. You help the Queen change for supper, another gown, to another mask, and as you fasten the final clasp, you realize you have gone an entire day without laughter. The idea of laughter feels almost obscene in this place where every breath must be measured, every glance calculated. When she leaves for the evening meal, you remain behind, tidying the chamber, folding the garments, smoothing the sheets. Outside the windows, the river gleams dark and cold, carrying secrets away into the night. You pause before the mirror once more, studying your reflection by candlelight. The wax flickers, making your face shift and blur. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of obedience and fear, a small voice whispers that this cannot last forever, that no life lived in such careful silence can escape its breaking point. Yet you push that thought away, because here, doubt is a luxury more dangerous than treason. You blow out the candle, and the chamber falls into darkness. The palace continues to breathe around you, restless and alive, a creature that feeds on the lives of those within it. And as you close your eyes, you realize that in this world of endless watchfulness, even sleep feels like an act of defiance. The next morning begins. Before the sky even turns grey, you wake to the muffled creak of floorboards, the faint metallic sigh of laces being pulled tight, and the low murmur of prayers whispered by the women around you. Sleep clings to you like fog, and for a brief, dangerous moment, you imagine what it would feel like to refuse the day to pull the blanket over your head and vanish into silence. But the thought dies as quickly as it forms. Here, in this palace that never truly sleeps, even your thoughts feel watched. You sit up, your body stiff from the cold, and for the 1000th time, you remember that comfort belongs to a different kind of life. You rise, you wash, and you prepare to wear your own face like a mask again. Today, the air in the Queen's chamber is different. There is tension hanging just beneath the surface, invisible but heavy enough to taste. Anne sits before her mirror, her posture flawless, her eyes sharp. You've learned that her moods change with the wind, yet this stillness feels unnatural. The Queen who once laughed softly while you brushed her hair now stares into the polished silver as if the reflection itself were an enemy. You move closer, careful not to speak until spoken to. Her hair glints in the dim candlelight dark. Smooth, alive with the scent of rose oil. And as you lift each strand, your hands tremble with the weight of what this act means. To touch the Queen is to carry her burdens. Even if she never speaks them aloud, she breaks the silence suddenly. Do you think beauty fades quickly? Her tone is calm. But you sense the trap in the question. You hesitate her, knowing that the wrong answer could wound or anger her. No, Your Majesty, you say softly. True beauty deepens with time. She studies your reflection, her eyes meeting yours through the mirror. And for an instant you see the faintest smile, a fragile curve of lips that disappears before it's real. Then let us pray that you're right, she whispers, and turns her gaze back to her own reflection. You continue brushing, each stroke deliberater, each breath measured, until the silence stretches into something almost sacred. There are days when you almost believe the court's lies, that you are part of something magnificent, chosen, blessed by proximity to power. But then you see moments like this, when the paint cracks and the light reveals the exhaustion beneath. The Queen's hands shake slightly as she reaches for her pearls, and you notice the faint tremor, the tiny flaw she tries to hide. You pin the jeweled hood over her hair, adjusting the angle until she appears perfect once more. You think of how much effort it takes to look effortless. When you follow her into the great gallery, the world awakens around you like a storm gathering strength. Courtiers line the walls, bowing, smiling, hiding daggers behind polished manners. The Queen's gown catches the morning light, a shimmering ocean of crimson and gold that makes every eye follow her. Yet even as they admire her, they whisper. You can feel it in the air, the way conversations shift when she passes, the way certain glances last a fraction too long. You've learned to hear the language of envy, to see the invisible web of ambition stretching through every corridor. Every compliment hides a blade. Every bow is a negotiation. You stand behind her as she receives visitors, your hands clasped at your waist, your face calm. Lady Mary Shelton enters first, her smile too bright, her gown too rich for someone of her rank. You sense trouble in that brightness. She curtsies deeply, offers news of her brother's recent favor with the king, and you see Anne's lips tighten for just a moment. It's nothing, a flicker, a breath, but it's enough to send ripples through the room. You realize, again, how fragile power is here. One man's rising star means another's fading light. And even queens cannot stop the orbit. Later, when the chamber empties and the air grows still again, Anne speaks without turning to you. The king favors the ones who amuse him, she says quietly, but he forgets who made him smile in the first place. You don't know whether she's speaking to you or to her own reflection, so you say nothing. She sighs, long and tired. Never trust laughter here. It is the sound people make when they are afraid. Her words settle in your mind like stones, and you carry them through the rest of the day. As the afternoon stretches on, you find yourself assigned to oversee the Queen's wardrobe repairs. The chamber smells of silk and lavender, the walls draped in colors richer than anything you'd seen before coming to court. You run your fingers across the fabrics, the brocade, the velvet, the impossibly soft satin, and you realize that these gowns are not just clothing, they are weapons. Every thread is stitched with strategy. Every jewel speaks a message. One gown announces piety, another seduction, another defiance. The Queen uses her wardrobe the way generals use armies. And you, needle in hand, are one of her quiet soldiers. As you work, the sound of rain begins against the windows, soft at first, then relentless, drumming against the glass like an unending warning. The sky darkens, and the palace lights flicker to life. Outside, the storm turns the gardens into shadows. And inside, you feel the pressure of unseen eyes. The Queen sits across the room, writing at her desk. You can see the curve of her shoulders beneath the gown. The way her quill hesitates, then moves quickly, urgently, across the parchment. She seals the letter with wax and hands it to you. Deliver this to Lady Margaret at once, she says, and her gaze lingers on yours longer than usual. And speak of it to no one. The letter feels heavy in your hand, heavier than paper should be. You don't read it. Of course, that would be treason, but you can feel the danger radiating from it. When you hand it to Margaret Wyatt, her expression flickers with understanding and fear. She tucks it into her sleeve, gives you the smallest nod, and walks away. You return to your duties with the dull certainty that something has shifted again, though you cannot yet name it. Evening falls slowly, bleeding its color through the windows until everything glows like dying embers. The Queen retires to her private chambers, and you follow her, carrying the basin of rose water and the soft towels warmed by the fire. She removes her jewels one by one, dropping them into your waiting hands. The weight of each gem feels almost obscene after a day like this. When she finally meets your eyes, she looks smaller somehow, younger, her painted face softening in the dim light. Do you ever wonder, she says quietly, what it costs to be loved by a king? You don't answer. There is no safe answer to that question. You help her out of the heavy gown, layer after layer, until she stands in her shift, pale and trembling in the firelight. For the first time, she looks human, stripped of all the armor that the day demands. She steps into the bath, closes her eyes, and exhales a sound that's somewhere between relief and grief. You turn away, giving her privacy, but her next words stop you. They will not forgive me for being what they made me, she murmurs, and you realize she's not speaking to you at all, but to the silence itself. The words hang in the air long after the fire has burned low. When she finally retires, you remain behind, tidying the chamber, folding her discarded garments, arranging her jewels back into their boxes. Outside, the rain has stopped, leaving the world slick and glistening under a half moon. You open the window just enough to feel the cool air against your skin. Somewhere beyond the walls, a dog barks, a reminder that there is still ordinary life in the world. Somewhere beyond all this golden fear. You close the window and turn toward the sleeping Queen. She lies perfectly still, her breathing shallow but steady, one hand resting near her throat, where her pearls usually sit. You wonder what she dreams of. Does she see herself walking through gardens heavy with roses? Or does she see the scaffold that gossip says is already being built for her? You cannot know. You only know that tonight, as you blow out the final candle, the palace feels too quiet, too aware, as if it too were holding its breath. And you, standing in the dark beside the sleeping Queen, realize the most terrible truth of all here. In the heart of splendor, even peace feels like the pause before a scream. Morning returns like a slow, merciless tide. The air in the chamber is thick and cold, and your dreams dissolve the moment your eyes open. You hear the familiar rustle of skirts, the faint crackle of a fire being coaxed to life, the weary rhythm of another day, beginning exactly as the last one ended. The Queen still sleeps, her face turned toward the dying embers, her dark hair scattered across the pillow like spilled ink. For a moment you watch her, caught by the illusion of peace, the way the faint light softens her features and makes her seem almost ordinary, almost safe. Then she stirs, her hand twitching as if chasing something in a dream. and the illusion shatters. You rise quickly, wrapping your shawl tight, and begin to prepare the basin. The towels, the brush, the armor she must wear to meet another day of scrutiny and performance. Outside, the palace hums to life with the low sounds of duty. The bells mark the hours before dawn, and already you can hear servants moving through the corridors, carrying trays of steaming bread and watered ale, exchanging whispered gossip in the half-light. The scent of smoke and damp wool clings to everything. You've come to recognize that smell it is the scent of exhaustion, of people who have lived too long inside stone walls that never forget. When the Queen wakes, she does not speak at first. Her eyes open slowly, unfocused, and for a few heartbeats, she looks not like a monarch but like a woman, startled to find herself still alive. You help her sit up, hand her the goblet of spiced wine meant to warm her throat, and only when she's taken a sip does her voice return. "What day is it?" she asks. Though you both know the answer doesn't matter. Every day in this palace is a mirror of the one before, different gowns, different faces, the same endless performance. You brush her hair in silence, the strokes long and careful. The firelight catches the gold threads in her nightgown, and for an instant she looks like something carved from flame. "They watched me yesterday," she says, finally. Her tone quiet, steady. "Cromwell's men, near the gallery." You keep your hands moving, pretending not to understand the danger laced beneath her words. She meets your gaze through the mirror. "If they watch me, they'll watch all of you." Her meaning is clear. Loyalty is not a matter of choice anymore. It is survival. You nod, and she smiles faintly, a curve of lips that doesn't reach her eyes. "Then let us give them something beautiful to watch." The gown she chooses that morning is the color of blood and gold, a deliberate provocation disguised as elegance. You help her into it piece by piece, fastening the pearls at her throat, smoothing the embroidered sleeves, tightening the jeweled girdle at her waist. The weight of it all is astonishing, more than 30 pounds of silk and metal, yet she carries it like a weapon. When she stands, the transformation is complete. The tired woman who woke in the dark has vanished. In her place stands a queen who could shatter a man with a glance. You step back, as you always do, to admire the performance you helped construct. It is beautiful, and it is terrifying. By the time she steps into the corridor, the palace has already shifted into its daily rhythm of deceit. Courtiers wait like flowers turning toward the sun, hoping for her favor. They bow, they flatter, they smile too much. The Queen glides among them, her words honeyed, her tone flawless. But you, walking a few steps behind, I can see the truth in the way her shoulders stiffen, the way her eyes flicker too often toward the doorways. She is not at ease, and neither are you. You begin to notice the patterns of avoidance, the ladies who once crowded to her side now finding reasons to linger elsewhere, the subtle distance between her and certain men who once swore loyalty at every meal. Power does not fade here. It leaks away, quiet and invisible, until one morning you wake to discover it's gone. At breakfast, the Queen sits at her small table beneath the painted ceiling, surrounded by women who pretend not to be afraid. The conversation drifts through meaningless topics, weather, fabrics, the song of the lark, but underneath, everyone is listening for danger. You stand nearby, arranging dishes, and you notice the faint tremor in Anne's hand as she reaches for her cup. She masks it with a laugh, too sharp to be genuine, and the sound slices through the stillness like a blade. "The king hunts today," she says, forcing lightness into her tone. "Perhaps he will bring me a trophy." No one answers. The silence that follows is suffocating, and you realize with a jolt that no one dares to mention the king anymore, unless forced. His absence has become its own kind of presence, a shadow spreading through every room. Later, as the court gathers in the great hall for the midday meal, you see it again. The distance, the fracture that no one will name. The king sits at the high table beside her, his expression unreadable. Once, he would have laughed with her, leaned close to whisper something scandalous or tender. Now he eats in silence, his knife moving methodically, his eyes fixed on nothing. Anne keeps her smile steady, speaking when spoken to, her voice smooth as glass, but her knuckles whiten each time she lifts her cup. You realize that what you're watching isn't a marriage anymore. It's a negotiation between power and pride. Two forces locked in a battle neither can afford to lose. When the meal ends, the Queen excuses herself with the perfect grace of a woman who refuses to acknowledge humiliation. You follow her through the corridors back to her privy chamber, and as soon as the door closes, the mask slips. She grips the edge of the table, breathing hard, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't look at me once. You want to speak, to offer comfort, but there is nothing safe to say. She straightens slowly, her composure rebuilding itself piece by piece. Fetch my letters, she orders. And just like that, the Queen returns. The woman buried beneath her crown once again hidden away. You spend the afternoon transcribing messages at her desk, your fingers cramped from the careful script. She dictates letters to her allies' noblemen, foreign ambassadors, even her father, but her tone remains guarded. Her words polished until all emotion has been drained from them. Every phrase is weighed, every compliment calculated. She signs each one with a flourish, her seal pressed firmly into the wax. And when you hand her the final parchment, she says softly, "Words are safer than people." You nod because it's true. Here, language is both shield and weapon, and silence is the most dangerous language of all. As evening falls, the Queen prepares for vespers. You help her change into a gown of deep blue velvet, the fabric heavy as midnight. The chapel glows with candlelight, and the air smells of beeswax and prayer. You kneel behind her as the priest intones his Latin verses, and your mind drifts with the rhythm of the words. You think of home again, the smell of earth after rain, the sound of your mother's voice, and you realize how distant that world has become. You wonder if you could ever return, even if you were free to try. The Queen rises, and you rise with her. When she bows her head, "So, do you?" When she leaves, you follow. Her shadow becomes your shadow, and the longer you serve, the less you can tell where she ends and you begin. That night, after she retires, you find yourself lingering by the window of her outer chamber. The moon is full, casting long ribbons of silver across the stone floor. Somewhere beyond the gardens, you can hear the faint sound of a lute, someone playing alone in the dark. It feels almost human, almost kind, and for a heartbeat, you let yourself imagine that life outside these walls might still exist. Then the sound fades, swallowed by the endless hush of the palace. You turn back toward the Queen's door, ensuring it's locked from within, and finally return to your bed. But sleep does not come easily. You lie awake, listening to the faint rhythm of your own breath, and think of how fragile everything has become, how one wrong word, one careless glance, could unravel the careful world you've built. The Queen dreams behind her locked door, and you dream too, though your dreams are darker, filled with corridors that lead nowhere, with mirrors that reflect faces you no longer recognize. Somewhere deep inside, you know that something is coming, something vast and merciless, and all you can do is wait for the sound of it approaching. The days begin to blend into one another now, a seamless pattern of duties and disguises, of whispered rumors and polite smiles that feel more like weapons than courtesies. You no longer mark time by the calendar but by the Queen's moods, by the light in her eyes or the tremor in her hands. The palace itself seems to feel the strain. Its stones creak at night as if they, too, are weary of holding secrets. The air has changed colder, heavier, as though even the walls are waiting for something to break. You move through the corridors with practiced silence, aware that footsteps carry more meaning than words in a place where listening is the most dangerous occupation of all. That morning begins with an unfamiliar sound, a loud thud from the Queen's chamber, followed by the sharp crack of something breaking. You rush inside, heart pounding, and find Anne standing near her writing desk, a shattered goblet at her feet. Her face is pale, her jaw tight, her fingers trembling. It slipped, she says too quickly, her voice brittle as glass. You kneel to clean the mess, but when you glance up, you see the tears she's trying to hide. The king dines with Jane Seymour tonight, she whispers, and in that single sentence, you hear the death knell of everything she has fought to protect. She turns away, and you see the reflection of her face in the mirror, half shadow, half flame. For the first time, you understand how a woman can look both furious and defeated at once. She spends the morning pacing, dictating letters that she never finishes, starting prayers that trail off into silence. Her thoughts seem scattered, as if part of her mind is already somewhere else, perhaps following the king through the corridors, perhaps imagining the sound of laughter that isn't hers. You try to offer comfort, but comfort here feels like blasphemy. What could you possibly say to a queen who feels the crown slipping from her head? When she finally speaks again, her voice is low, controlled, but her eyes are wet. They think they can replace me as easily as a jewel in a setting, she says, but they forget that jewels cut as well as shine. You don't know whether it's a promise or a threat. Later that day, a messenger arrives, bearing a letter sealed with the king's crest. You deliver it to her with hands that suddenly feel too heavy, and she opens it slowly. Her expression unreadable. You try not to watch, but curiosity gnaws at you. When she finishes reading, she folds the parchment with careful precision and sets it aside without a word. For a long time, she stares at the fire, the flames reflected in her eyes. Finally, she says quietly, "He asks that I show more gentleness." The words are soft, but they carry a bitterness that fills the room like smoke. "Gentleness," she repeats, almost laughing, as though the only thing wrong with this marriage is my tone of voice. You say nothing because silence has become the only safe language left. That evening, you accompany her to supper. The great hall gleams with candlelight, and the scent of roasted meat and spiced wine hangs thick in the air. The king is already seated when she enters, and the moment his eyes lift to meet hers, the entire hall goes still. He greets her politely, too politely, and the sound of his voice feels colder than winter wind. She smiles, radiant and composed, and takes her seat beside him. You stand behind her, as always, watching, waiting, reading every shift in posture and tone. The courtiers chatter around them, pretending not to see what everyone sees, that love, once so blinding it burned the world, has turned to ash. Halfway through the meal, the king laughs at something Jane Seymour says across the table. It's a small thing, barely more than a murmur, but you see the way Anne's hand freezes on her goblet. The colour drains from her face, and her smile falters just long enough for those who wish her harm to notice. When the laughter fades, the hall fills with a silence sharper than any knife. She turns her head slightly toward you, her eyes hard, glittering, and you understand. Her silent command, do not let them see her bleed. You steady her cup, adjust her sleeve, and by the time she looks forward again, her mask is back in place. To the untrained eye, nothing has happened, but you know something irreversible has cracked. After the feast, she withdraws early under the excuse of a headache. You follow her back to her private chamber, where the facade collapses at last. She slams the door shut and grips the edge of the table so hard that her knuckles whiten. He parades her like a saint. She spits, pacing. And I am made the sinner for being bold enough to love him first. Her anger burns through the room like a fever. And for a moment you glimpse the woman beneath the crown. The one who fought, who dreamed, who once believed she could outwit fate. You stand quietly, knowing that anything you say will only feed the fire. When she finally sinks into the chair by the hearth, her fury gives way to something quieter, heavier. Do you know, she says softly, I sometimes think they will not rest until I am gone altogether. You don't answer, but you think she might be right. The following days unfold in uneasy rhythm. The Queen smiles when she must, prays when watched, laughs when commanded, but you can see the hollow spaces growing behind her eyes. The courtiers sense it too, the slow unraveling of a power once absolute. They drift toward Jane Seymour's orbit like moths to a steadier flame, murmuring her name with the cautious excitement of those aligning themselves with the future. In their glances you read betrayal, long before the words are spoken. The Queen sees it as well, though she pretends not to. One afternoon, as you lace her gown, she murmurs, They think I cannot see the rats leaving the ship, but I can smell them. Her smile is small and cold. I will not go quietly, whatever end they have planned for me. One night, as you prepare her chamber for sleep, a shadow appears at the doorway. Margaret Wyatt, her most trusted friend. You bow and step aside as she enters. The two women speak in low tones while you tend to the fire, pretending not to hear. But some words drift through the air regardless. Cromwell. Evidence. Letters. Watching. You feel your blood run cold. When Margaret leaves, the Queen sits in silence for a long time, her fingers tracing the rim of a candle holder. Finally, she says, without looking at you, They build their case while I breathe. The candlelight flickers across her face. And in that moment, you realize she no longer believes she can save herself. She only wants to choose how she falls. That night, as you undress her body feels lighter, frailer. You sense her exhaustion, the kind that sleep cannot cure. She looks at you suddenly, her eyes bright and strange in the firelight. "If they come for me," she says, "do not be afraid. Fear feeds them." You nod, but your throat tightens, because you know courage is easier to speak of than to live. She lies down, her face turned toward the darkness beyond the window, and you sit quietly by the door, keeping watch. The wind outside moans through the courtyard, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else, something metallic and final. When dawn comes, it brings new peace. You wake to the sound of boots in the hallway, the dull clatter of armor, the distant command of a man's voice. You rush to the window, heart racing, and see a group of soldiers assembling in the courtyard below. Their movements are orderly, efficient, like men performing a task too familiar to question. The Queen is still asleep, her breathing slow and even, her hand resting near her heart. You hesitate for a moment, torn between waking her and pretending that this day will be like any other. But deep inside, you already know the truth. The silence before the storm has finally ended, and the sound that now rises from the courtyard is not the beginning of another morning. It is the beginning of the end. The sound of armor moves through the corridors like thunder muffled by stone. A rhythm that doesn't belong to ordinary mornings. You stand frozen near the window, your breath caught between disbelief and recognition. The Queen stirs at last, her eyes fluttering open, the faintest crease forming between her brows. She listens before she speaks. "What is that?" she whispers. Though she already knows. You force your voice to stay calm. "Steady. Zolgus. Your Majesty." In the courtyard, she sits up, her hair loose and dark against the white linen. And for one terrible instant, she looks more alive than you have seen her in weeks. Every nerve, every muscle awake to the truth that has been waiting just beyond the door. The calm that follows is unnatural. The calm of someone who has stepped beyond fear. Then it begins, she says softly, and her tone is almost gentle, almost merciful. You move to her side, helping her dress as the noise grows louder. There is no time for ceremony, no ritual of perfume or pearls, only layers of fabric pulled tight over trembling hands. Her skin is cold beneath your fingers, but her face is composed, the face of a queen, determined to face her executioners with dignity. "They will not find me weeping," she murmurs, and you realize she isn't speaking to you but to the ghosts of every woman who came before her. Queens and mistresses and forgotten girls who once believed a king's love could protect them. When the door opens, the men step inside, with the courtesy of vultures, polite. Kiet. Lethal. Sir William Kingston bows low, his eyes averted. "Your Majesty," he says. "His Grace the King has commanded that you accompany us to the tower for your own safety." The lie is thin as air. But Anne knows. Her smile brittle. "My safety?" she repeats, and the irony in her voice makes even the soldiers look away. You follow as they escort her down the corridor, your steps barely making a sound on the cold flagstones. The palace that once shimmered with music and laughter feels hollow now, stripped of its illusions. Servants freeze where they stand, bowing or curtsying, their faces pale, their eyes darting away. Some of the courtiers watch from doorways, feigning sorrow while hiding satisfaction. You catch fragments of whispers, treason. The musician. Her brother words like daggers, flung from the shadows. The Queen walks among them, as if she can't hear. Her spine straight, her gaze fixed ahead. You think of the first day you saw her, radiant and fierce, and you wonder if she already sensed this ending written beneath every triumph. Outside, the air bites with the chill of early morning. The carriage waiting in the courtyard gleams black under the grey sky. Rain begins to fall, thin and cold, tracing patterns across the Queen's veil. She turns to you once before stepping inside, her eyes steady. "Stay close," she says quietly. You nod, though you are not sure what your presence can possibly change. As the carriage lurches forward, the sound of hooves on cobblestone echoes like a funeral march. You sit across from her, hands clasped in your lap, afraid even to breathe too loudly. The city moves past in a blur market, stalls half open, faces peering through shutters, the river glinting like steel. London seems to hold its breath, watching the fallen star being carried to her eclipse. The tower looms ahead, grey against the darker sky, its silhouette rising like a memory of every death England has ever known. The gates open slowly, groaning under their own weight, and as the carriage passes beneath the archway, the Queen's hand tightens on her lap. "So this is where they bring traitors," she says softly, "and queens." You wish she wouldn't speak, because every word feels like a prayer that might summon tragedy faster. The carriage stops in the courtyard, and the door opens to the waiting silence of soldiers who have learned how to look without seeing. When she steps down, her slipper touches the wet stones, and for a moment she seems almost to sink into them. Absorbed by the history of the place, she straightens, meeting Kingston's gaze. "Tell His Majesty I am his loyal wife, and have been from the first day to the last," she says, and though her voice does not tremble, yours does when you echo her curtsy. They take her to her chamber within the tower, a room meant for royalty, not prisoners. Though the iron lock on the door makes a mockery of that distinction, you help her remove her soaked cloak, and she sinks into the chair by the small fire, staring at the flames as if trying to memorize their warmth. "It's strange," she says quietly. "All these years, I lived in fear of this place, and now that I'm here, it feels almost peaceful. There is nothing left to lose. You want to protest, to say there must be hope still, but you can't find the words. Hope here feels like treason. Day pass, though you lose count. The tower has its own kind of time, measured not by sunlight but by footsteps outside the door, by the clink of keys, by the rhythm of prayer whispered too softly for God to hear. You attend to her, as you always have, brushing her hair, bringing her meals she barely touches, listening when she speaks and when she doesn't. Sometimes she writes letters, her quill scratching steadily over parchment. Sometimes she sits in silence for hours, staring at the river visible through the narrow slit of the window. The light there is strange, watery and pale, like the last colour before fading entirely. One evening, she says, "Do you think they will bury me beside him?" The question hangs between you like a thread suspended over fire. You cannot answer, and she doesn't ask again. Rumours reach even the tower words carried by guards who whisper when they think you aren't listening. You hear the names of men arrested, their faces flashing through your mind like ghosts. Mark Smeaton, George Boleyn, Henry Norris, men who once bowed to the Queen, now condemned by association, by gossip, by envy. You try to shield her from the whispers, but she already knows. They will make examples of us all, she says one morning, her voice as calm as the river's surface. It is easier to erase the truth than to live with it. You wonder what truth she means, the truth of her innocence, or the truth that innocence never mattered here. One night, long after the guards have gone quiet, she wakes suddenly and calls your name. You rise from your cot and go to her side. The moonlight spills through the narrow window, painting her face silver. "I dreamed," she says, to her eyes distant, "that I walked through the gardens again, and the air smelled of lilacs. There was laughter, and I could hear the bells from the chapel. But when I turned, no one was there." You sit beside her, unsure whether to speak. She looks at you and smiles, the kind of smile that belongs to another world. "If they ask you," she says softly, "tell them I was not afraid." When the morning comes, it brings with it a strange quiet. Even the birds seem reluctant to sing. You help her dress in a gown of grey silk, simply and unadorned. She insists on wearing her own hood, though her fingers shake as she ties the ribbons. You want to stop time, to keep her here a little longer. But the knock at the door is inevitable. Sir Kingston enters again, his face pale, his voice formal. Her Majesty is to appear before the council. She nods, stands, and looks to you once more. "Remember what you saw," she says, "and what you did not see." You walk behind her as they lead her away, your vision blurring as light floods the corridor. Somewhere beyond these walls, the city prepares to celebrate May Day, the festival of rebirth and renewal. How cruel, you think? that the season of life should bring her death. The queen walks without hesitation, her steps echoing off the stones, and you follow, every beat of your heart a prayer that no one will ever hear. She does not look back, and as the heavy door closes between you, the sound reverberates through your bones like the last toll of a bell, marking not just the end of her freedom, but the end of everything you once believed could last. The chamber feels emptier without her. For hours after they lead the queen away, you remain seated on the small wooden stool beside the window, listening to the echo of footsteps that no longer belong to anyone living. The tower seems to hold its breath. The guards pass outside the door at intervals, their boots scraping against the flagstones in an unhurried rhythm, as though time itself has slowed to watch the unraveling of a human life. You are told to remain within the Queen's apartments until further notice. No explanation, no comfort, just a command given with that polite cruelty the court has perfected. You obey, because obedience is all that's left to you now. It is late afternoon when she returns from the council. Her steps are slow, deliberate, and when you rush to meet her, you almost don't recognize the figure that enters. She is pale, but not with fear. Her eyes are strangely calm, as if she's seen something beyond mortal concern. The air around her feels colder, charged with invisible electricity. You take her cloak, your hands trembling, and she says softly, "They have found me guilty." She smiles then, a smile that doesn't belong in this world, serene, detached, and somehow triumphant. Treason, adultery, witchcraft. They have given me every sin a woman can wear. Her laughter is low, fragile, almost tender, and yet I feel lighter. There is nothing more they can take. You want to kneel, to cry, to tell her that she has not lost everything while she still breathes. But the words stick in your throat. Instead, you pour her wine with hands that shake. She doesn't drink. "I thought I would rage," she says after a long pause. But the truth is, I am tired of rage. It consumes the soul before death ever touches the body. That night, she asks for parchment and quill. You light the candles, set the ink upon the table, and watch as she begins to write. Her hand moves swiftly, the quill whispering across the page. You cannot see the words, but the silence between them feels heavy, as though each line carries the weight of an entire life. When she finishes, she folds the letter carefully, sealing it with the last bit of wax you have left. "For the king," she murmurs. "He will not read it, but I must send it anyway." She places the letter in your hands, and you feel its warmth where her fingers touched it. "Promise me you'll see it delivered." You nod, and she smiles again. That same small, ghostly smile. "Then I have done all I can do." She turns toward the window, where the moonlight slips through the iron bars. "Strange, isn't it?" she says softly. "How the moon looks the same, whether one is free or imprisoned." Sleep comes in fragments that night, interrupted by dreams that cling like cobwebs when you wake. In one, the queen stands on a hill of white lilies, her hair blowing in the wind, her eyes fixed on something you can't see. When dawn breaks, the light filters pale and thin through the narrow window, painting the floor with streaks of grey. The sound of bells reaches you faintly from across the river, the city preparing for another day that will forget her. She rises without complaint, asks for warm water, and begins to dress with a grace that feels almost sacred. You bring her the simple grey gown she requested, and as you fasten the laces, you realize your hands are trembling again. She places a hand over yours, steadying you. "Do not grieve," she says gently. We were never meant to last in this world. By midday, rumors drift in like smoke under the door. The men condemned with her have been executed. Their names pass through the corridors like ghosts: Smeaton, Weston, Breton, Norris, and at last, George Boleyn. Each name tightens the air until it's hard to breathe. The Queen listens in silence, her face unreadable. Only once does she flinch, when her brother's name is spoken, but her voice remained calm. They were brave. She says, "I pray they met their deaths as gentlemen." Her composure is unbearable, the quiet of someone who has crossed beyond terror. You want her to weep, to shout, to be human again. But she seems already half gone, walking somewhere between this world and the next. That evening, you sit with her by the fire. The light flickers across her face, softening the sharp lines the past weeks have carved there. "I keep thinking," she says quietly, "about the day I came to court. I thought power would make me untouchable." Her eyes drift toward the flames. But power doesn't protect anyone. It only paints a brighter target. You listen, unable to look away. "They will call me wicked," she continues. "But they will not understand that wickedness was the only language this court ever spoke. I merely learned to speak it better than most." She pauses, then smiles faintly. "Do you know what comforts me most now? That Elizabeth will live. My daughter will live, whatever name they give me, whatever stories they tell. She will carry my blood, and that will be enough." Later, after she has gone to bed, you find yourself standing at the window, staring at the dark water of the Thames. Across the river, the palace lights flicker like distant stars, indifferent to the tragedy unfolding in the tower's shadow. You think of the laughter that once echoed in those halls, of music, of dances, of a world that pretended to be eternal. Now it feels like another life, another century. You wonder if the king dreams of her tonight, or if his new passion has already erased the memory of her eyes. You wonder whether power always devours those who dare to hold it, or if it simply reveals what was always waiting beneath the skin. The next morning, she rises before the sun. There is no fear in her movements, no hesitation. She asks for the same gown, the same grey silk. Her hair she leaves unbound, falling loose over her shoulders. You bring her the hood, but she shakes her head. "Not today." You want to protest, but the quiet authority in her voice stops you. She kneels to pray for a long time, her hands folded, her lips moving in soundless supplication. When she finishes, she looks up at you, and her eyes are bright, not with tears, but with clarity. "It'll be quick," she says simply. "He has sent for a French executioner. They say he is skilled." Her tone is almost conversational, as though discussing the weather. It is that calm that breaks you at last. You drop to your knees beside her, unable to speak, and she takes your hands gently in hers. "Do not mourn me," she whispers. "I have lived as few women ever dared to live, and I will die, as few dare to die with my eyes open." Outside, footsteps approach. The knock at the door is soft, almost apologetics. Sir Kingston's voice trembles when he announces the hour. The Queen stands, straightening her gown, smoothing the folds with deliberate care. "Bring me my cross," she says, and you place it into her hand. She holds it against her heart for a moment, then smiles at you one last time. "You have been kind," she says. "Remember me kindly." You cannot reply. Words have abandoned you entirely. As they lead her away, you follow until they reach the courtyard. The morning air is cool and bright, the sky painfully blue. The scaffold stands waiting, draped in black cloth. You cannot bring yourself to step closer. From where you stand, you see her ascend the steps with the same grace she once brought to the throne. The crowd is silent. Spellbound, she turns to speak. Her voice carries clearly, calm and sure. You cannot hear every word. Only fragments. Pray for the king's soul. God save England. I die a good woman. The French swordsman kneels before her, murmuring something in his own tongue. And she nods. She kneels too, tucking her hair beneath her cap, her fingers tightening around the cross. There is a stillness that lasts forever, and an instant, and then silence. When it is over, the world does not end. The river still moves. The gulls still cry. The city resumes its endless noise. Yet something invisible has changed in the air. You walk back to her chamber, to the empty bed, the folded gown, the half-burned candle, and you realize that her absence has filled every space more completely than her presence ever did. You sit where she once prayed, and for a long time you cannot move. Outside, the wind carries the tolling of the chapel bell across the water slow, deliberate, endless, and you understand that though her voice is gone, her story will linger, whispering through the walls of this kingdom for centuries to come. For days after her death, the tower felt hollow, as if the air itself refused to settle. You moved through her chambers like a ghost wandering through memory, careful not to disturb the objects she had once touched. Her brush still lay upon the table beside the mirror, a few dark strands of hair tangled in its bristles. The cross she had held to her chest before the end gleamed faintly in the half-light, a remnant of devotion, or defiance, or both. Each thing left behind had become sacred, and yet unbearable to look at for long. The scent of rose oil still clung to the linens, soft and persistent, as though her presence refused to leave completely. You could almost believe that if you turned suddenly enough, you would see her there again, leaning over the desk, sealing a letter, her eyes alight with thoughts too quick for words. But the silence remained unbroken, vast and final. They gave you 3 days before ordering her things cleared away. The guards came with heavy steps, in different hands, and you stood aside, helpless, as they carried away the gowns you had once laced for her, the books she had loved, the silver combs she had chosen each morning. You tried to save something small, anything that might have belonged to her spirit rather than her station. But there was nowhere safe to hide it. The king wanted her gone not only from the world but from memory. Even her name was to be spoken only in whispers, as though it might infect the living with disobedience. You thought of Elizabeth then, her daughter, the little girl with her mother's sharp eyes. Would they let the child remember, or would they teach her to forget? The thought haunted you until you no longer knew whether you were grieving the queen or the erasure of her soul. You were dismissed soon after. The order came in a tone meant to sound merciful, but mercy has no meaning when it comes wrapped in fear. You left the tower with a single trunk of belongings, and the vague instruction that your service had ended with the queen's life. The morning was grey, the sky a smear of ash. As you crossed the courtyard, you glanced back once. The scaffold had been dismantled, but the ground still looked darker where the wood had stood, as though the earth itself had taken her blood and would not release it. A crow perched on the parapet above, silent and watchful. For an instant, you wondered if souls might return as creatures of the air, seeking what had been denied them on earth. Then the wind shifted, cold and sharp, and the moment passed. The road away from London was lined with travellers who did not meet your gaze. Word of her death had spread through the city like fire, and already the stories had begun to change. Some said she had confessed, others said she had laughed as the blade fell. Some called her a witch, others a martyr. Truth had splintered into 1,000 fragments, and you understood with quiet horror that no one would ever know which version of her would survive. You travelled north to the small manor that once belonged to your family, a place of silence and overgrown hedges, far from the noise of court. The village women looked at you with a mixture of pity and suspicion, as though the shadow of the queen clung to your skin. They whispered that you had served the doomed one, the one who bewitched a king. You let them whisper. Words had lost their power to wound you. In the quiet of those first weeks, you tried to return to ordinary life. You rose with the sun, tended the garden, mended your own clothes, cooked your own meals. Yet the stillness felt alien, and the simplicity of each day frightened you. After years in the palace, you had grown used to danger, its rhythm, its music, its pulse under the surface of everything. Without it, the world felt too quiet, like a body after the heart has stopped beating. At night, you lay awake listening to the wind moving through the trees and thought of the Queen's voice. Low and measured, speaking the truth no one dared to hear. You realized you missed her, not only as a mistress, but as a presence that made the air vibrate with purpose. Without her, the world seemed smaller, duller, cruelly ordinary. Sometimes you dreamt of her. In those dreams, she was not dying but walking through the palace corridors again, the hem of her gown whispering against the rushes, her smile quick and knowing. You followed her as you always had, 3 steps behind, and she turned once to say something you could never quite hear. You would wake before dawn with her name on your lips, the echo of her voice fading into the grey of morning. On those days, you could not eat, could not speak. You would stand by the window until the sun rose, reminding yourself that she was gone and you were still alive. And yet even that distinction felt uncertain. One evening, months later, a messenger arrived with a letter bearing an unfamiliar seal. Inside were only a few lines, written in the neat hand of Lady Margaret Wyatt. She was buried at the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. A small service, a few witnesses. I thought you would want to know. You read the words again and again, until they blurred. The Queen was gone. The court had moved on. And England belonged to a new wife now. The speed of it was almost obscene. You burned the letter in the hearth, watching the flames devour the ink. When only ash remained, you whispered the Queen's name once. Not in mourning, but in defiance. Winter came early that year. The frost crept through the walls, and the nights grew long and merciless. The village spoke often of the new Queen Jane Seymour, fair and meek, a shadow where Anne had been flame. You tried not to listen, but every mention of her name felt like salt rubbed into a wound that refused to close. The king's court celebrated again, as though death had been nothing more than an inconvenience. Yet, rumours drifted north, rumours that haunted you in the cold hours before dawn. They said the king had grown restless, that the new queen seemed frail, that the spectre of Anne Boleyn lingered in his dreams. Some claimed he saw her face in the mirror and smashed the glass. Others swore that a heron flew over the palace one night, circling 3 times before vanishing into the clouds. You smiled when you heard these stories, not because you believed them, but because they felt like justice disguised as legend. In the solitude of your exile, you began to write not letters, not confessions, but memories. The world might silence her name, but ink could still remember. You wrote about her laughter, sharp and sudden, about the way she tilted her head when listening to music, about the scent of rose oil and the weight of the crown that had marked her for death. You wrote until your fingers cramped, until the candles burned low, until you felt her beside you again, not as a ghost, but as the echo of a life that demanded to be known. You knew these pages might never be read, might rot in a chest long after you were gone. But it didn't matter. Writing her was a form of resurrection. Sometimes, when the wind shifted, you could almost smell the river again. The Thames as it had smelled that final morning, metallic, damp, endless. You would close your eyes and see her walking to the scaffold, her steps steady, her hands folded. You would remember the calm that fell just before the blade struck, the way the world seemed to hold its breath for her one last time. And in that memory, you found something close to peace. She had not died begging or trembling. She had died as she lived, fierce and composed, her silence louder than any cry. Spring returned at last. The frost melted. The fields came alive again, and the villagers began to forget. But you did not. Eich Dam. As light touched the windows, you whispered her name like a prayer. Anne. The queen who dared. The woman who burned too brightly for her time. You whispered it not for her soul, but for your own, because remembering her meant you had not yet surrendered to the world's forgetting. And though her body rested beneath the stone floors of the tower, you knew that somewhere, perhaps in the blood of a red-haired child growing far away, her fire still lived, waiting for the day the world would remember its heat once more. Years drifted by like smoke through the rafters. So slowly you stopped counting them. Yet they passed all the same, carrying with them everything you had once known. The world changed its face, but it never forgot the habit of cruelty. Kings grew older, wives were replaced, and the same court that had murdered one queen now worshipped another, as if devotion were a coin easily spent and replaced. You heard the news from travellers passing through your village, men who spoke of London with its endless noise and shifting loyalties. They said the king's new wife had given him a son, that bells rang through the kingdom, that the people cheered as if heaven itself had opened. You wondered if anyone still remembered the woman who had been executed to make room for this miracle, or if her story had already dissolved into rumour and superstition. You thought of the Queen's daughter Elizabeth, that fragile, red-haired child, growing somewhere behind palace walls, perhaps loved, perhaps merely tolerated. You prayed she had inherited her mother's sharpness, the courage that had once terrified courtiers and kings alike. Sometimes, in the grey quiet of morning, you found yourself speaking to Anne as if she were still there. You would look up from the spinning wheel, your fingers stained with wool, and say softly, "They speak of him again. Your Majesty, the king who swore love eternal." You would laugh then, quietly, the sound half sorrow and half disbelief. It became your strange ritual, a way to remind yourself that you had lived a life once filled with fire. The villagers had long stopped asking questions about your years at court. They preferred the safety of ignorance, afraid that knowing too much might invite misfortune. You, who had seen the splendour and the blood, who had touched the pulse of power and felt it turn to ice, now seemed to them a relic of something best left buried. Yet the past refused to remain buried. One day, a letter arrived, bearing the seal of Lady Margaret Wyatt, your old companion from those shadowed days. Her handwriting trembled with age, but her words were clear. "I have seen the Princess Elizabeth. She grows into the mirror of her mother. Her wit, her eyes, her manner Anne breathes through her, and the court cannot decide whether to fear or adore her. I thought you should know." You read the letter until the ink faded beneath your tears. For the first time in years, you felt the spark of something dangerous hope. The Queen's legacy had not been erased. It had merely changed its form. You folded the letter and kept it beneath your pillow, touching it each night before sleep as though it were a charm against the world's forgetting. As the seasons turned, you grew older, though you scarcely noticed it until your reflection began to betray you. Your hair, once dark, now carried streaks of silver. Your hands had become thin, the skin lined like fine parchment. Yet inside, you burned the same fire that had once lit the Queen's eyes. You lived quietly, neither rich nor poor, neither saint nor sinner, a ghost in a kingdom that no longer remembered your name. But one evening, as the sky deepened into violet and the air smelled faintly of rain, a rider arrived at your door. His clothes were plain, but his posture was not. He bore the confidence of someone who knew the court. He introduced himself as Thomas Wyatt's son, sent with a message from Lady Margaret, who was dying. You felt the earth tilt beneath you as he spoke her name. "She wished to see you," he said, before she passed. The journey south took days. The roads were muddy, the inns foul-smelling. But the pull of the past drew you forward as surely as gravity. You arrived at the estate at dusk, the sky bruised with the last light. Lady Margaret lay in her chamber, frail and small beneath a mountain of blankets. But her eyes, those clever, mischievous eyes, still held the spark of youth. When she saw you, she smiled. "You've aged better than I have," she whispered, her voice a thread. You took her hand and felt how light she had become, almost weightless, like parchment ready to crumble. "Do you remember?" she said. "The morning Anne first laughed after her coronation." You nodded, though the memory hurt. She laughed as though she had swallowed the sun. Margaret said softly, "I think of that sound whenever the world feels too dark." She paused, her breath shallow. "Promise me something. Promise me you'll tell the truth of her. Not the one they wrote, but the one we knew. Don't let her vanish into their lies." You promised, though the words broke in your throat. Her fingers tightened once, then loosened. By dawn, she was gone. You buried her beneath a hawthorn tree, where the white blossoms fell like snow. The wind whispered through the branches, and you thought you heard laughter carried on the air, light and far away. As you stood there, something inside you shifted. The grief that had defined your life began to melt into something else. Not peace exactly, but understanding. History had never been merciful, yet memory could be. You began to gather what fragments remained of that lost world. The letters, the small trinkets, the half-remembered stories passed between servants and friends. You wrote them all down, not for fame, not even for justice, but for truth. You described the Queen as she had truly been brilliant, flawed, passionate, reckless, brave. You wrote of her courage when faced with betrayal, of her tenderness in private moments, of the fierce intelligence that made her both adored and feared. You wrote of her death without sentimentality, but with reverence for the dignity she carried to the end. As the years wore on, your writings grew into a secret chronicle. You kept them hidden, bound in leather, beneath the floorboards of your cottage. Sometimes you imagined a future where someone might find them a scholar, a poet, perhaps even Elizabeth herself, and read the truth of her mother's life through your eyes. It comforted you to think that even if your own name vanished, your words would carry the echo of hers. On quiet evenings, when the light turned gold through the window, you would sit by the fire and read your pages aloud, whispering her story to the wind, as though the world itself needed reminding. Then one spring morning, the air alive with the scent of blossoms, a rider arrived once more. This one carried no letter, only a proclamation. The king was dead. The new ruler of England was Queen Elizabeth. For a long moment, you could not breathe. You asked the messenger to repeat the name, though your heart already knew. Elizabeth, the child of Anne Boleyn, the daughter of the condemned, The girl born in scandal was now sovereign of the very realm that had killed her mother. The irony of it struck you like a divine jest. You laughed, a sound choked with disbelief and joy, and then you wept until your hands trembled. That night, as you sat before the fire, you whispered aloud to the darkness, "She has returned. Anne. Through her, you have returned." You imagined the scene in London, the bells ringing, the crowds cheering, the banners unfurled. You imagined Elizabeth walking through the same palace halls where her mother once ruled, her chin lifted, her eyes sharp with intelligence and grace. You pictured her hand resting on the same throne, the same golden seat that had cost her mother her life. You wondered if she ever thought of Anne while sitting there, if she felt the shadow of that lost queen standing behind her, proud and silent. You knew then that no executioner's blade could truly destroy a life like hers. Some flames burn so fiercely they pass from one soul to another, carried forward until the world is ready to see their light again. You lived long enough to see the early years of Elizabeth's reign, to hear of her speeches, her triumphs, her refusal to marry, her declaration that she would rule alone. People called her the Virgin Queen, but you smiled whenever you heard it, because you knew the truth. She ruled not alone, but with her mother's spirit beside her, guiding her hand, shaping her destiny. Sometimes, when the wind swept through your garden and caught the scent of roses, you thought you heard two voices in it, one young and bright, one older and unbowed. You would close your eyes, whisper a prayer, and know that in the great ledger of time, justice had finally written her name in gold. You never returned to court, though you could have. The summons came once, written in the elegant hand of a secretary, sealed with the new Queen's crest. It invited you to London, to attend a reception for those who had once served her mother. You held the letter for a long time before placing it on the table beside the fire, watching the edges curl as the candlelight caught them. You were too old for that world now, too steeped in its ghosts. You didn't need to see those marble halls again to know that Anne's laughter no longer echoed there. Still, the thought of Elizabeth sitting on that throne, head high and unyielding, filled you with a quiet pride that words could never express. You didn't need to meet her to understand that the daughter had inherited not just her mother's wit, but her will, the same dangerous fire that refused to bend, even beneath the weight of crowns. The years rolled forward like a slow, solemn tide. Your hair turned white, your hands frail, your memory both sharper and softer than before. You found peace in small things, the warmth of sunlight across the table, the hum of bees in the garden, the rustle of parchment. When you turned the pages of your own writings, you had recorded everything, every fragment you could remember. The story of Anne's life told not through rumour or envy, but through the eyes of someone who had loved her. You often wondered if it mattered, if words could really defy the decay of time. But each night, when you whispered her name, it felt like lighting a candle against the dark. The world outside your cottage might have forgotten. But here, within these four walls, she still breathed. Sometimes, travellers brought stories from London of Elizabeth's speeches before Parliament, her defiance against foreign kings, her refusal to take a husband. They called her Gloriana now, the Virgin Queen, a symbol of England's strength and pride. You listened quietly, never interrupting, though inside you marvelled at how perfectly history had turned its wheel. Once, a woman was executed for daring to stand beside a king as his equal. Now her daughter ruled without a man beside her at all. It was as if Anne had returned through her child to claim the justice that death had denied her. You smiled at the irony, at the strange symmetry of fate, and you thought that if there were any gods in heaven, They had learned something from watching England's cruelty. As your health began to fade, you found yourself dreaming more often of the past, of the palace corridors glimmering in candlelight, of Anne's voice calling your name in that half-playful, half-commanding tone that could make you forget your fear. In those dreams, she was not dying or broken. She was alive again, standing in her gown of gold, her eyes alive with mischief, her hand reaching for the crown that would both raise and destroy her. You would wake with tears on your cheeks. For the image so vivid, it took a moment to remember where you were. You began to keep a candle burning through the night, as though its flame could guide her spirit back to you, just once more, to let you say goodbye. But she never came. Perhaps she didn't need to. Perhaps she had already found her peace through Elizabeth, through the empire that now bore her mark. One morning in late autumn, a messenger arrived at your door. He was a young man, hardly more than a boy, and his cloak was stained from travel. He carried a sealed packet bearing the royal crest. Your hands shook as you opened it, breaking the red wax carefully. Inside was a letter written in a graceful hand you did not recognize. Yet the words struck through your heart as though you had been waiting for them all your life. Her Majesty thanks you for your loyal service to her mother and for preserving her memory. She has learned of your writings and wishes you to know that they shall be protected. She sends her blessing and gratitude. There was no signature, only an initial E. You sat for a long while after reading it, the sound of wind moving softly through the trees outside. The letter trembled in your hands, and you pressed it to your heart, whispering through tears, "She knows." You did not write again after that. There was nothing left to add, nothing left to defend. The story had passed into the hands of the one person who could keep it alive. You placed the Queen's letter among your pages, bound them together in the same leather cover that had once wrapped Anne's Book of Hours, and hid them beneath the floorboards one final time. The act felt like sealing a promise between past and present, between the living and the dead. When the task was done, you sat by the window, watching the last leaves drift from the trees, and you felt the weight of time ease from your shoulders. Winter came early that year. The first frost glittered across the fields like glass, and the nights grew long and still. You took to your bed, your body too weak to rise, but your mind remained clear, bright as ever. Each night you whispered a prayer not for forgiveness, not for salvation, but for remembrance. You prayed that Elizabeth would continue to rule with the same unyielding spirit her mother had carried, that the world would one day speak Anne's name not with scorn but with awe. You prayed, most of all, that somewhere in the great turning of time, mother and daughter might meet again, not as shadows or stories, but as women who had shaped a kingdom. On your last night, the fire burned low, and the air grew still. You felt no fear, only the quiet certainty that your watch had ended. You thought of the Queen's laughter again, that bright, unguarded sound that had once filled every corner of your life. You thought of her standing beneath the blue sky on the morning of her death, her courage a thing so luminous it blinded those who hated her. You thought of Elizabeth, the daughter who had outlived them all, carrying her mother's blood like a flame that refused to die. And as your breath slowed, you whispered one final time, "She lives." When they found you the next morning, you looked peaceful, a faint smile still resting on your lips. The leather-bound pages were gone, and no one knew what became of them. Some said the new Queen herself had sent for them, keeping them locked away in her private chambers. Others believed you had burned them in the night, releasing the words to the wind so they could never be used against her memory. Whatever the truth, the story survived. In London, the people began to speak again of Anne Boleyn, not as a sinner or a witch, but as the mother of their queen. Painters captured her likeness. Poets wrote verses in her honor. Her name, once forbidden, was now spoken in reverence. Years later, long after your name had faded from the world, Elizabeth would stand in her palace garden at twilight, holding a single rose. They said she often paused there in silence, her gaze turned toward the sky, as though listening for something only she could hear. Some claim she whispered words to the wind, soft, intimate, like a child calling for her mother. And when the wind answered, rustling through the leaves, she would smile, lift her head, and walk back into the palace, her crown gleaming in the dying light. History would remember her as Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the monarch who turned England into an empire. But you, if you had lived to see it, would have known the truth that lay beneath the legend, that she was, and would always be, her mother's daughter. And through her, Anne Boleyn still ruled, not with a crown of gold, but with something greater, the unbroken echo of a woman's courage that time itself could never silence.